Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our live webinar, How to Tackle Microsoft 365 Workspace Provisioning with our special guest, Todd Klindt. My name is Ivan, and I'm a sales manager here at Syskit. We'll be joined by Todd as well as my colleagues, Alexandra and Hrvoje, who will be showing us a demo of Syskit Point after the presentation. Many of you already know us as a company, but for those of you who are new, who don't know us, let me briefly introduce you to Syskit. So we are a software development company founded more than 12 years ago. We developed products for SharePoint on-prem documentation and administration, as well as products for Office 365 governance and auditing. We currently have more than 3,000 customers around the world, and many of them are very well-known names, as you can see on our slide. We currently have 5 products, including our famous SPDocket for SharePoint on-prem, as well as Syskit Point for Office 365 governance and security. And just a bit of housekeeping before we start. All registrants, so for those of you who registered, will receive a recording of the webinar within a few days. After Todd's presentation, we will have a short demo of Syskit Point showing how it can help you with Microsoft 365 workspace provisioning. We will then have a Q&A session with Todd where you can ask any questions you might have. And please use the Q&A function on the right side of the screen to ask your questions throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce you to Todd, if he even needs any special introduction. Todd is a Microsoft MVP, SharePoint consultant, and a very good friend of Syskit. Todd has been a SharePoint specialist for over 15 years and is one of the most influential people in the SharePoint community. He specializes in infrastructure and administration topics for both SharePoint and Office 365. Also, Todd regularly contributes as a speaker at major conferences in the US, Asia, and Europe. I will now give a warm welcome and turn things over to Todd. Todd, are you ready?
I am ready. Thank you very much. All right, so we've been having some GoToMeeting issues. Let's see how this all works. Okay, so it looks like you all can see my screen. Let me look at the audience view here. Okay, now we were having some problems earlier with the webcams. So this is not a threat, but I'm going to turn the webcam on just so you know that this is a live deal. It worked. Excellent. The other thing is I wanted to make sure that everybody got to appreciate the awesome sweatshirt that I'm wearing. And I'm actually going to take this off because it makes noise on my headset. But thank you, everybody. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. What a great, fun topic. I am super excited to talk about this one today. So Ivan already gave me a great introduction. The important piece about this slide is that there's a picture of me with the hat without the headset, so it all good. But how to reach out to me. So I will answer all the questions that come up today, but if something comes up and you've got more questions, here's how you can get a hold of me. And I work for Praxis Consulting, so we've got a Facebook page like all good companies do, but you can hit me up on Twitter, email, or any of the normal places. And this picture is suitable for using to scare your children if you need to. So when the Syskit folks reached out to me and asked me to talk about this, I was really excited because as an admin, provisioning and governance and all of that, like that's just not something I've ever really embraced. I was just kind of, in earlier lives, I was just kind of, blah. But moving to the cloud has made this more interesting for me. I've been able to find places to grab onto and get some excitement from. So for those of you in the audience, and I haven't opened up the audience view yet to see who all's there, but if you're classically IT pros, governance and provisioning can be really boring, horrible topics. And I want to ask you for the next, 30, 45 minutes, however long this takes me, to open your mind a little bit that this idea, this practice of governance and provisioning is kind of fun. It's like eating vegetables. Everybody knows it's good for you. Like you all know that having good governance policies is best and having defined provisioning processes is best. Everybody knows it's good for you, but nobody actually likes it. So I'm going to ask you to, maybe put a little cheese or a little salt on those vegetables for the next few minutes and see if you can choke them down, because it is actually good and fun stuff. I've been doing sessions like this one for the last couple of years, and there's really a lot of good stuff here. So open your mind a little bit and try to have a little more fun than the guy in the picture. And from a very selfish standpoint, one of the things that I like about governance and provisioning and some of the things we're going to talk about here in the next few slides is that it frees you up to do better things. And I was going to say funner things, but I had fun in the line below, ahead of it, so I didn't want to do that. But it allows you to move a little bit and not take care of all the grunt work, the day-to-day pieces of maintaining your farm, or your, not your farm, your tenant. So that's kind of the what's in it for me. You know, eating the vegetables, not a lot of fun, but when you do that, when you start working some of these policies in place and start doing some of the things that we're going to talk about, you're going to find yourself having time to do parts of the job that you appreciate more. Kind of like, you know, when I started moving from on-prem servers to the cloud, that was kind of tough, but now I'm not spending time swapping out dead power supplies or hard drives or anything like that stuff. I get to move a little and do more fun things. And so that's one of the immediate benefits to you all once you get through this piece and kind of, you know, move to acceptance on governance and all this. And the last piece about this is future you will thank present you when you do this. This will definitely be one of these things that once you get into place and start thinking about these processes and do some of the work down the road, you will appreciate the fact that you did it. So if you know if you like you, do future you a solid and look at some of the stuff. So why do we talk about this? Why is this a thing? Why didn't we talk about this much on prem? Why didn't we talk about this much 5 or 10 years ago? We did, but it was less necessary because on-prem SharePoint, I don't want to say it didn't scale as well, though it didn't scale as well, but we didn't want to scale it as much. So when we were on-prem, when I've been doing talks with Syskit and doing talks at conferences for 15 years now. One of the things we talked about was database size and how databases grow and where to put your transaction logs and where to put your content databases on your fastest disks and all those considerations. And if not formally, but in the back of our heads, these always made us nervous about scaling. This always made us nervous about putting a lot of content in SharePoint and having lots of sites and things like that. And so these scaling issues, the governance issues weren't as important because we had these other things that were limiting it. We had other bottlenecks. Well, one of the great things about the cloud and about Microsoft 365 specifically is that it scales so easily. Like we don't even worry about that. Like we have to worry about how much space we've got on our quota for our tenant, but we're not worried about what the disks look like or how big the transaction logs are getting or any of those things. We don't have to worry about that. And so that frees our mind up to do some of the things we probably should have been doing the whole time. And that's one of the things I've been preaching since I've been doing on-prem talks is that SharePoint likes to scale by site or site collection back in the day. And you can tell by a content database, when you add them in on-prem, it would start warning you about having too many sites in a database at like 4,000 or 6,000 or something like that. Microsoft engineered this product to have thousands, tens of thousands of sites and site collections. But again, because of these other limitations, we didn't really scale like that. But now that we're in the cloud, we can, and it's really easy. And the tools are getting better for it, and the back end's better for it. And so now there's a real benefit that comes from having good governance policies and having good defined provisioning. But one of the curses of the cloud is that it scales so easily. And it's not just SharePoint. One of the things that we have with the cloud is we just have more of everything. So the Exchange folks are having the same problems because they used to limit mailbox size because how much disk space it took. Now you can keep every email you've gotten since 1996. Identity folks are having the same issue. Now you just have identities everywhere because it's so easy to bring them in. And this is one of the great benefits of the cloud. The whole big data thing is we can just have so much data. So, kind of watch out what you ask for. We wanted to be able to scale things. We wanted to have things in the cloud. We've got it, and now we've got this sprawl, and that's not a bad thing. For a lot of cases, having more sites is better. Having more email is better. All of that, and so I guess I want to tell you to not fight it, but embrace this ability to scale as well as we can. But just understand it and look to work inside of its limitations. So one of the first things, and I had this conversation with on-prem folks a long time ago, and I continue to have it right now, is self-service. How much should you let your end users do? And I like to tell the story way back. I have been a SharePoint administrator for every production version of SharePoint, starting with SharePoint 2001. And one of the things that I liked about SharePoint was it allowed me to be efficient. Some think of that as lazy, but it really is efficient. And by that, what I meant, one of the things I really fell in love with SharePoint with was when I would make somebody a site, SharePoint 2001, 3, 7, whatever. Once I made that SharePoint site for them, I could put it in their hands and I didn't have to do anything anymore. It was out of my hands. And so I could do other things besides, adding people to their sites and all that. They got to handle all that. And so some of those things were, figuring out what new functionality to add to the platform. Honestly, some of those things were emailing my mom and playing solitaire and trying to figure out what this new YouTube thing was that everybody was excited about. But it was great for me to be able to push that work off onto them. Number one, it was just not a great use of my time. Number two, in most cases, they were better suited to do that job anyway. It didn't make a lot of sense for somebody in IT to decide who should have access to the accounting site, but it made a lot of sense for somebody in accounting to decide who had access to an accounting site. So it just made good sense for them to handle that. So very early in my career, I embraced empowering my users. Again, because of just it's better for them and it's better for me because I'm a touch efficient or lazy. But like anything, anything, it's good within moderation, within reason. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is I want you to open the gates up and let your users, enable all the self-service things and let them do their thing. But let's put some guardrails in. Let's nudge them in the right direction so that they don't make a complete mess of your tenant. The other thing that I tell folks when a lot of the work that I do these days is migration, moving people from on-prem SharePoint to the cloud or moving them from inferior products to Office 365. And this question always comes up and people are always afraid of it because they imagine this just, smattering of sites everywhere, hundreds and hundreds of things. And they want to shut it off. And Microsoft has made it really tough to shut the self-service bits off. There's pieces here and there you can do, but it is difficult, if not impossible, to really stop somebody from creating SharePoint sites, creating teams. Well, teams not as much, but SharePoint for sure. So what you end up with is this really frustrating game of whack-a-mole where you try to shut down a place where people can create things and then they find some other place to do it. And honestly, I don't want to do that. And I've been in IT long enough that I remember when the hardware and software that I used at work was the best hardware that I would have access to. Like I remember getting excited about getting a new laptop at work because that was going to be the coolest, fastest, newest laptop that I got to play with. Those days are long gone. But part of that is every one of your employees has a smartphone and a tablet and all that, and they're familiar with all these other cloud services. And if you make it tough for them to do what they want to do on your platform, they have options. If you make it tough for them to create a place where they can share files with one of, a partner company or something, because you won't let them create a site or because you've disabled external sharing or any number of the well-intentioned things that you do, if you make it too tough for them, they're going to remember that they've got this Dropbox that they use to share pictures of their kids with the grandmas, and they're just going to put the file there, and you don't want that. So it's tough to shut off, and even if you could, you don't want to because you users just have too many options these days. They will find a way around it. Shadow IT is a thing. So we're going to talk about some ways to make this so that your information stays safe, you have some idea what's going on, but that end users also can get their job done. Because that's really what we're here for as IT. We're here to make sure that the people that are doing the real work in our company can do it as easily as possible. And again, this gives you the ability to move up the stack. So now instead of being the gatekeeper and deciding who gets a site collection and who has to, and setting it all up, now you're not doing that anymore. Now you're looking at stuff like, information protection or conditional access, adding security that way, or figuring out what new functionality that the Microsoft has introduced that reuses a word that they're already using for some other piece of functionality. it frees you up to move up the stack and do more exciting things than the work at the bottom. So I'm a big favor of self-service. I know my last big SharePoint admin job before I became a consultant, we had a lot of policies in place. Anytime anybody wanted a site, we created a forum, and or we did. So the earlier versions of SharePoint, the self-service stuff wasn't as great, but when they needed more space, we would give it to them. And we would just have touch points and just kind of nudge them in the right direction. And we also had expectations for them. So that was back in the dark days of SharePoint Designer and unghosted pages and things like that. And we would give them lots of freedom. And then we would say things like, here, you can download SharePoint Designer. It's free. You can do these things. But if you break something, I have one way of fixing it, and that's resetting your page. And you'll lose all of your customizations. You'll lose the snowflakes that follow your mouse cursor and all that. And you say that enough times, and people lose some of that stuff enough times, and their expectations get set correctly. So I think everybody kind of wants self-service, and they want to be able to do these kind of things. So one of the first things that I want to suggest, now that you're on board, you want to empower your users to do things and make lots of changes in your environment. The first step in not letting this drive you crazy is to get ahead of it. So just know that this is going to happen, and this can be getting ahead of it before you migrate into your tenant. This can be getting ahead of it right now, even though you've had a tenant for several years and you've already got a mess. Figuring this out is starting the process, and it can be really scary. It's kind of like that big joke, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. This is the same problem. And I don't know about all you, but I definitely have a problem when I see a big task ahead of me. I get paralyzed sometimes because I'm not sure where to start. So let's talk a little bit about that. My Simpraxis coworker, Mark Anderson, he is a big proponent of this thing called the maturity model. And he and Sadie Van Buren, another friend of ours, actually sat down and codified this maturity model for different parts of Office 365 and collaboration and all that. They did great stuff. And as I read it, it really resonated. But then I sort of realized that I already knew about this. They just put to words and defined the various ideas that were bouncing around in my head. But really, the maturity model is just a very formal, well-defined idea that we all know of: crawl, walk, run. If you're going to do something, you want to crawl first, and then you're going to, once you get confident with that, get good at that, then you're going to walk. And then once you got that, you're going to run. So I definitely encourage, as you're coming up with a governance plan and as you're coming up with how you want to provision sites and teams and things like that, to be compassionate with yourself, be patient with yourself, and know that there is a maturity model here. Know that you are going to have to crawl before you can run, and that's okay. And that you're going to make mistakes and you're going to fall down and you're going to bloody your lips a little bit. That's okay. We're all among friends here. Nobody's judging you for that. But also recognize that part of the maturity model, part of what they introduced was not everybody's going to get to I think 500 is the highest maturity model. Not everybody's going to get to 500 on that maturity model. And in this example, not everybody's going to get to run. And that's okay. Like, running might not make sense in your environment. Your environment may require you to hold scissors. Then of course, running's a bad idea. But also be patient with yourself and recognize that you're only going to be able to do a small bit to start out with, and that maybe the end goal is just walking. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You need to be an expert on this. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Be okay with making small changes and just recognizing that you can't do everything when you make your plan. So when I tell folks this, I tell them to start small. So for this, the crawl aspect, and the simplest one ever is branding. That is really easy. And so this might be, depending on your organization, this might be talking to your marketing folks or your branding folks or whatever. If you've got company colors, just figuring out what the color palette looks like inside of Office 365. And then a super easy win is a logo. So the logo at the top, I guess for you guys up here, the top left corner of your SharePoint site or your team site, just getting that in there, just making it look not exactly like out of the box SharePoint or out of the box Teams, that is a huge win. And one of the things, whenever I'm learning a new framework like PowerShell or whatever, whenever you're doing that, you're kind of fighting two battles. And so when you start with your governance plan and your provisioning thing, whether you realize it or not, you're actually fighting two battles. One of the battles is how to do whatever the thing is that you're trying to do. So how to brand or how to set up conditional access or how to set up whatever that process is, that's part of what you're doing. The other thing you're trying to do is learn how to use the tool. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about what those tools are. And so what I like to do is I like to split those two tasks up. And branding is a great example of that. I already know how to go into the UI and change the colors. And I know what all the different knobs are for that. And I know what they mean and what the output looks like. For adding a logo, I already know how to do that. I can go into the UI and do that. I know what it looks like when it works. I know what it looks like when it doesn't work. And so of the two front war that we're fighting, I like to make sure that one of those fronts is as easy as possible. I like to start with a process that I thoroughly understand and then try to learn to use the tool for that process. And so that's why I recommend doing something like starting small with branding, because everybody knows how to brand SharePoint within, a little bit of reason, and it's a real obvious win. But whatever the tool that we end up talking about, and we'll talk about those in the next slide, whatever the tool is that you decide to use, try something simple with it first. And if you end up with a third-party tool, they're going to show you all the bells and whistles. Have some idea about that. But the first foray, the first test, try something simple. The other thing, and I don't have it in this slide, but if you don't already have a dev tenant, this is a great time to get a dev tenant. And I've got a blog post on that. Julie Turner's got one. It's a free tenant from Microsoft, and it's got 25 users and it's got a bunch of content and all that. A great place to learn how to do these things and play with these things. Every piece of this that I ever do for a customer, I do in my dev tenant first, without exception, because I make a lot of mistakes and I really want to make them in my dev tenant. I don't want to make them in a customer environment. So, and that frees me. I'm not worried about screwing up. I can just go try things and throw something on the wall and see if it sticks. So do that. So as you start small, another one is content types. So this is a great way as we're talking about information architecture and having things show up right in search, creating content types, adding columns to document libraries or lists that utilize those content types. That is another super easy one, a little higher up the scale than branding. Most of us, IT pros maybe couldn't create a content type and add it to a document library without poking around a little bit. I probably couldn't. But that is another valuable thing that you can do in your governance to say, okay, we are let's give an example. I'm a real estate company, let's say, and we often have similar types of data, call it addresses, call it whatever. So we're going to create a content type, and then we're going to create a site for every property that we own. And so then that content type is going to be the same. So now when I go and do a search, I can search for content types. And no matter where it's at, I know that this document library is going to have this content type, and it's going to be the same. It's going to be consistent across all of them. So think about your work and if the vertical that you're in lends itself well to any of that. Another one that's fun to set up is the external sharing policy. So this is Microsoft's ability to, I just before I got started the session today, I shared my slide deck with the folks at Syskit so they could provide it all to you folks. And that's an external sharing thing. So Demir is in my tenant and I was able to type his name and it all went off. But I had to do some work to get that exactly the way that I wanted. And so one of the things that I tell folks is to define a default external sharing policy and have that be built into your governance and your provisioning process. Not that is the one that's set in stone, but the default one. And so maybe your external sharing policy is no external access. And then if somebody wants to enable external access on their site, then you've got a process that you go through, you have to teach them the ins and the outs, things like that. But this is an easy win from a security standpoint. Your security folks will love it when you can show them the plan and you can say, here are all of the things that happen when we provision a new site. And one of them is we set external sharing to off until the site owner does something to show that they can do it correctly. And then kind of a higher up one is information protection, so the MIP stuff. And this is setting sensitivity labels and all of that. Setting a default one of these is also a pretty good idea. And again, not that you're setting it in stone and saying that nobody can ever, share externally or whatever, but just setting it to the default so that people don't make mistakes. And then if they need to change it afterwards, they can do that. And another thing that I like to tell folks is, you start whatever the tool is that you've got. you'll start putting these pieces in place. So one of the first ones I'm going to talk about is a site design from or a site template from Microsoft. There's some verbs that I can use to add the branding, and I will try that out for a while, and that'll work. And then I'll get brave and I'll create a site script that adds a content type and adds it to a document library and add that to my site template. And I'll get kind of brave, but these all end up being, a site template, previously known as site designs. But then I start second guessing myself because, well, I don't want external sharing on, but then there's this type of site that I always create, and its entire purpose is sharing with external people. Well, maybe I shouldn't add that. One of the things that I will tell you to consider is maybe you have more than one policy. Maybe you have a couple of types of sites that you create a lot, and it's okay to have more than one policy and take bits and pieces. And the tool, whatever tool you use, will help you decide how that looks like. But it's okay to have more than one. So how do you do all of this? I've got you excited about it. You've come around. Governance is your favorite word now. You're going to name your next dog governance. You've got some great ideas on how you want to stamp these new sites out and govern them and control them. But how do you actually do it? How do you get your fingers dirty and all that? There are a lot of tools that are out there for that reason. And which tool you use depends a lot where you are in the maturity model, and which tool you use at what time. A book that I read a long time ago that was really influential to me was called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it's the idea that the things that you do in your career to get you to whatever position you're in, continuing to do those same things might not get you to the next position you want. You might have to change your philosophy on things. You might have to develop different skills, whatever. In another part of the book, they talk about how the person who is the perfect CEO for a 10-person company might not be the perfect CEO for that same company at 100 people or 1,000 people. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that CEO. He was exactly the right thing at the right time, but maybe she won't be the right one as the company is bigger and has different concerns. So I encourage you to kind of have that same philosophy with governance and all this. And again, think about the fact that you've actually got two activities going on. You've got the activity of laying down the governance policy and the provisioning policy, and you've got the tool. And no matter what tool you use, you can always do those same actions. So this is another one where it's easy to try something easy and then move up to higher ones. One of the things that I will tell you, while I want you to start small and I want you to do something like just slapping a logo on every site that goes out, I do want you to begin with the end in mind. So there are some things that you may want to do. Have an idea. Know that that idea is going to change a dozen times before you get anywhere near the end. But have an idea so that you don't make decisions on the tool or a policy or something that will hurt you down the road. Again, you're doing all of this. I do all of this stuff for future Todd. Future Todd's got a lot working against him. So I want to do everything I can to ease his burden. He needs all the help he can get. So as I'm putting things in place now, I want to begin with the end in mind so the future Todd doesn't have any tougher time than he needs to down the road. So there are a lot of tools that do these things. And this is in no way an exhaustive list whatsoever, but these are the ones that I discuss with customers most often. The first one is site designs. They're called site templates now, and I've been using the old name for years now. So this is built into Office 365. It's free. You all have it. There's a slide at the end of this deck that has some resources on it. There's a link there that'll get you started. Of course, I can answer any questions you've got. This is built into the platform, and the way that it looks is you have a site script that is a chunk of JSON, JavaScript object notation, that defines an action. And that action can be set external sharing policy, create list, whatever. And then depending on what that action is, there are different parameters, what's the list name, what's the list type, all that kind of thing. You take these site scripts, these atomic JSON blobs, and you put them together into a site template. And then that site template you can apply to different types of sites inside of Office 365. So right now, team sites and communication sites are the only ones, the modern sites you can slap these site designs on. But these are incredibly easy to use. And by easy to use, I mean incredibly easy to find somebody on the internet who's already done the thing that you want, so you can steal their JSON as an example. Really easy to use for you as the administrator, easy to implement because they're built right into the platform, and also easy for your end users because you can set a default site design, which means your end users do nothing, So an example of something you might have in your default site design would be your branding. You want the company logo on every page, or you want the color scheme or whatever. That doesn't show up. The end user's that's just there. But also, after the site is built, so after their team site or the communication site is spun up, they can go in and apply any of the other site templates that you have out there. And it can do any of the things, add document libraries, do whatever. So you might have a real estate template, or a consulting customer template or whatever, and they can add that. They can do it. The site owner can. You don't have to do it. You can do it with PowerShell. You can push them out. The other great thing about these site templates is you can update them. So let's say that you've got one in place and it's perfect, but then a year from now you add a new content type that you want, or new document library or something. You can add that to your existing site design and then push that out to all of the sites that currently have that site design or site template, and they will be updated. So you don't get stuck with this whole, when it's stamped out, it's the only thing that will ever have. You don't get stuck at that point in time. So I'm a big fan for the crawl portion of your governance journey or provisioning journey using something like site design. Is really easy. Now, site designs do a bunch. They don't do everything. And annoyingly, two of the things that they can't do is they can't create files or create folders. So you can have a document library specified, but you can't create folders inside of it. So you can create a property library, but you can't create a folder inside of that says, permits or anything like that. So the next step that I usually bring people down is the PNP, the Patterns and Practices Provisioning Framework. That takes more work to get set up. There's more walking than crawling in that, but it also has more power. So that will open up some of those other things and makes it, you have a lot more flexibility. And then finally, what I can tell folks is if site designs aren't cutting it for you, site provisioning isn't cutting it for you, or it might cut it for you, but it's just so much work. Look at third-party tools. And there's a bunch of provisioning tools out there. Most of them have great interfaces for letting you create your site designs, or your provisioning template. One of the things about a site design, I mentioned that there were ugly blobs of JSON. Both site designs and PNP provisioning allow you to take an existing site or an existing list and save it out as a JSON blob. So you can have your end user build up the thing that they want, and then on the back end, you can save that out, blast it out to other sites. Really great tools. The third-party ones will do those kind of things too, and they may include other functionality that you want. So definitely take a look at third-party tools. When it comes to governance, like I mentioned, I like to leave everything on, but you need some guardrails. And these days, the easiest way to handle that is with Microsoft 365 or Office 365 group governance. Again, this is built right into the platform, but this is a way for you to leave everything open so that Ned in accounting can create as many sites as he wants, but he's got some guardrails to keep it from just splattering all over your tenant. This is a short list, but it's my favorites. I'm going to be honest. There's a lot of different things that you can play with, but these are the top 5 that I like that you can control. Again, when you create a team, that has to create a group. So I'm saying this is group governance, but it really is team governance, and it is SharePoint governance if you don't create a non-group site. So the sites that you want to create the default, these are groups as well. So again, I'm calling them groups, but this also impacts teams and planner and all that. So one of the things that you can do is you can control who can create them. And this is all outside of the purview of IT. IT, whoever's got the SharePoint admin role or the tenant admin role, they can get around all of this. But you can say, I've got a group of folks in my company who are highly technical, though they do other things. They can all create these groups, nobody else can. And before somebody can get added to that group, they have to go to a lunch and learn about groups or whatever. That is something that you can control, who can create the group. A naming policy, so you can say anytime a group is created by somebody that's not in IT, it's got a prefix that says, public or user or something, or it has a suffix that has the person's department or whatever. You've got some templates around what you can do, but that makes it easy when you're looking in any of your administrative interfaces to see which ones are created by IT and which ones are created by end users. Guest access, you can control what kind of guest access can be added to the site. An expiration policy, so this is a really, really big tool, and this says anybody can create as many groups as they want, we just don't care about that. But when a group is created by an end user, if it doesn't get touched every 30 days, we're going to start the process of deleting it. And that process looks like emailing the owner, asking them to do something. There's some things in place that Microsoft 365 uses to decide what active means. You know, the file's been uploaded, has there been traffic in Teams, those kind of things. That's all in the interface that you can use. But that's a really good one. That keeps the cruft from accumulating, and you don't end up with these groups and teams that haven't been touched in 6 years or whatever. That's a good one. Applying a default sensitivity label is a good one too. Again, if you're working in a highly controlled environment and you want to make sure that no data sneaks out, you can put a default really high sensitivity label on some of these groups. One that I don't mention in here and that I wish that I would have is for the naming policy, you can prohibit words, you can ban words. So there's the obvious use case for that, that is, you know, profanities and things like that. But the less obvious use case is banning the name of your company. So nobody can create a group that says, you know, official Contoso accountants or something, because the word Contoso is banned. Again, IT is not impacted by this. Another thing in that words you can ban, you might ban things like president or any kind of roles where you think somebody might try to pretend that they are somebody that they're not. Because remember, when they create this, it creates a site and an email address and all those kind of things. So consider that in your naming policy. To set all of this up, the person setting the group governance plan up needs an Azure AD P1 license. And on the books, Microsoft says that everybody in the group needs a P1 license, but in reality, they never, ever check that. So know that if you don't see that or it's grayed out, you as the user trying to define it might need that Azure AD P1 license. One of the things that I really like that I've thought about lately is deprovisioning. So I really like creating a lot of things, and for groups, I like you know, setting expiration dates and all those kind of things. But some things don't fall inside of that, and so I like to have the talk with companies about deprovisioning. And this is something that I automate for them with PowerShell or a Flow or something. But this is for content that is no longer active, but we don't want to delete. We don't want to expire and delete out. And so for things that do delete, remember we've got the site recycle bin that keeps the site and the group and all of that for 93 days, but don't rely on that. But what I like to tell people, and it's kind of an intellectual exercise, is what about things, so let's say a property, I keep using the real estate thing. Let's say we have a site per property. What do we do when we sell a site? Do we sell a property? Well, you know, at some point, we're going to be done with all that. We're going to close. I guess we delete it, but man, we really don't want to delete it, because, you know, lawyers and all of that. So we want to have some process to archive it. And so this is kind of the framework I use for this. And this isn't everything, but depending on what your, you know, your business is, you may want to consider some of these. So set the site as read-only, and you do that in, you know, SharePoint Admin Center so that none of the content can change. You may want to change the owner depending on, you know, how that process works. One of the things that I like to do is create an archive hub. So, you know, a team site called archive properties, archive sites, whatever. Set that as a hub site. And then whatever, as you're using hubs, move your archived property or your archived whatever to the archive hub. And that will do a couple things for you. That will push down some branding so that it's obvious if anybody has a link and they go to that, there is branding that is different from your active site. So they have the obvious thing from that. That lets you do things like have a search scope in that archive hub that only searches archive properties, so that you can do some stuff with that. And then ideally, you can also, or alternatively, you can also remove those sites from your search results so that they're not gumming up your tenant-wide search things. But I really like this idea because, again, we're not so confined by how much database space things take and all that. I'll be honest with y'all, I'm kind of a digital hoarder. On my desk, and not that it's digital, but I still have a Windows Phone here that I haven't used in 100 years. So, I mean, I have a tough time getting rid of things. That's an active Windows Phone. It's really right here. So I really don't like deleting things because you never know when you're going to need that piece of information. So having an archive policy is a good idea. Now, if you're in a big industry, if you've got anybody in your business that has a legal degree, talk to them about this, because there are some things that they're always going to want to keep, some things they definitely don't want you to keep. There also is legal hold functionality inside of Office 365. But I do, this is, if nothing else, it's a good discussion point on what to do. This slide was in case I had time for demos, and I do not. Here are some resources. Again, they're going to be on the slide that the Syskit folks send out to you. Just an overview of site templates and site scripts, super easy to use. A link to the PnP provisioning framework and how to get that up and going once you move from crawl to walk. and then a link that kind of takes you down the settings that I talked about for the Microsoft 365 group. You know, the governance around that and things you can do. Super easy to do also. And here is one final shot of me wearing this awesome snowman sweatshirt that I love so dearly, and all of my contact information. So reach out to me. I know in the chat room here they're soliciting questions, but this is also if something strikes you later on today, you can reach out to me here. That is all that I have. I think I'm a couple of minutes under. That's not normally the case, but Yvonne, I think it's back to you.
Well, thanks, Todd, for the awesome presentation. So remember, folks, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them for our Q&A session with Todd. But before that, we are going to turn things over to Alexandra, our product designer, and Hervoy, our product development lead, for a quick demo on how Syskit Point can help you with Microsoft 365 workspace provisioning. Alex and Hervoy, are you ready?
Hi, Ivan. Thank you for the introduction. We are ready. So Hervoy decided to put on his hat. I tried mine on and opted in to go as Grinch instead. Let's just jump straight into how Syskit Point can help you with provisioning. So Hervoy, are you ready to start?
Yeah, let me jump in. Yeah, my name is Hervoy, and I'm gonna put on my IT admin hat. So we're gonna do a two-part demo. Alexander will show you from the end user perspective, and I'm gonna be in a IT admin, as you can see. So here we are in our Syskit Point, and let's just jump in right into our governance. So if I go here to my settings and the governance part, I'm going to be able to set up all the different governance policies that you can do using the Syskit Point. We are talking today about provisioning, so I'm going to jump into the provisioning. So using the Syskit Point, you can provision Microsoft Teams, Microsoft 365 groups, Yammer, and SharePoint sites. And then we have a lot of options when how you can set it up. The idea here is to present to your end users the templates, so that you can be in better control of what they are creating on your environment. So let's go here for edit this template. Everything is filled out, and it's much easier for me to explain what's going on. So what you're going to need to do, you're going to need to give your users a name and then a description, and that is basically you coaching them into what for what purpose will they use this kind of template. So in this example, I'm using something called confidential internal project, and I'm going to stay in that role. So the thing here is that you can, for the Microsoft Teams, you can use Microsoft template ID, and for the SharePoint sites, you can use a site templates to just be sure that you're applying everything that you want. So for my example, you can set up the privacy, and here we have a couple of options for our users. So you can let your end users decide on this, is it a private or a public, or you can just set it up in a template. So for my example, I want everything to stay private since this is a highly confidential internal project. You can also set up some properties on your Microsoft 365 group that sits behind this Microsoft Teams. So for example, in this case, you can set up if it's going to show in your global address list. I'm going to leave it off because I don't want it to show there. The next step is where you're going to define who is owner, member, and primary and secondary contact. And this is a really important step for you to set it up. You can set it up so that by default, a requester and manager of requester be an owner of the site. And you would do that because you want to have a bigger security here because this is highly confidential. You can also allow your end users or requesters in this case to add additional owners, and this is something that you can they can do by default, and this is why you would leave them to do that. They can choose their members, and that's okay. Here we have also one important thing, and this is for me as an IT admin pretty important. For example, the site is not, or Microsoft Team is not up to our governance policies, and I need to contact somebody to tell me what's going on. And this is an idea here that you can use our primary contact to just find out who is the one person responsible for this team. It's usually recommended to have multiple owners, and then there can be diffusion of responsibility. But if you use a primary contact, then you know who you can call and see what's going on. Let's go next. So here we have our couple of additional properties that you can set up. So here we have the external sharing settings. So this is basically that you set up a default value for newly created teams using this template, so that only people in your organization are allowed to see content inside of this team or the team that's going to be created using this template. And this is for this example, it's really the one that makes most sense. You can also apply sensitivity labels by default. So if I can assign my confidential sensitivity label on this team, and every team created is going to have this confidential security sensitivity label applied. I can set it up department, but I want to talk a bit more about terms and conditions. So these terms and conditions is maybe more also the way that you are coaching your end users. So Alexandra is going to show to you later how it looks in our Teams applications, but basically you can give them some kind of additional information on what's going to happen. So you're going to tell them, hey, be sure that you're not externally sharing and stuff like that. So let's go to the next. And then you also have this last step is the naming rule. So you can set up name prefix or name suffix. And then you can also set up an approval process, and this is important. So for this example, I want this to be well thought out, and I want to have some kind of manager and admin approval. So it's a two-stage approval process. But for something like, I don't know, general project, maybe I want it to have to be automatically approved. So you can have a lot of flexibility on setting up this approval process. And then you can also set up some kind of governance policies. So if we just go here, we have 4 different options for Microsoft Teams. So you can set up access reviews, and this is important for these highly confidential files and folders. I want to be sure that my site owners are checking regularly if there be some kind of breach of our policies. And this is the way that you can set it up from the get-go. Then we also have minimum and maximum number of owners, so you don't want to have too few or too many owners on any site. This is just the best practice. And then you can also check for the orphan resources, and this basically means that you're going to check if maybe everybody from the owners group has gone from the company and you would like to do something about it. So this is a way that you can get these policies set up from the beginning. So when the user creates it, a Syskit point will check if these policies are applied. So this is a way, if I click here, update template, my template is created, and I'm going to give it over to Alexandra to show us how it looks in our application and for the end user. Alexandra, you ready?
Thank you, Hrvoje. Yes, just give me a second. Okay, are you seeing my Teams app now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So right now we'll jump into the end user's shoes. As Todd already mentioned, it's important to make sure that your end users are in this process to be as simple as possible for them. So that's why we decided to create a Syskit Point Teams app to send requests for all new workspaces in your environment. And this is what it looks like. I'm now in the shoes of Cork Blunt. I just got to work, open my Microsoft Teams app as I do every day, and I have a Syskit Point Teams app already pinned here for me. I'm just going to go ahead and close this window, and I would like to send a request for a new team. So on the first step, at this point, I know I want to create a new team, but your users sometimes may be not so sure about what they would like to create. So for example, they don't know if it maybe should be a group or a Yammer community or a site, meaning that here they can see all the services that they will receive with each workload. But for this purpose, I'm just going to stick with creating a new Microsoft team. On the second step here, you can see all the templates that are available for me. And right now, you can already see the one that Hrvoje just created. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one for a confidential internal project. And I need to decide on the privacy. Not much of a decision here. As you can see, I can only select it to be private. And that's exactly because my administrator said it so. And I have this message here saying that this value is already predefined. So I cannot do anything. Instead, just go ahead and click on this team to be private. Obviously, some general information. I need to choose a name for this team. And you can see here that since Hrvoje set a naming rule, you can see the final team name will have the label confidential in the prefix. Then I'll just go ahead and write a description. I'm not really creative today, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it like this. And then I need to decide on who are going to be the owners of this newly created team. As you can see, I'm already predefined as Cork and Eva as well. because Hrvoje said it so, but I can also add some additional people here, like for example, Jonathan, and I can decide on all the team members I would love to have added to this team. I go ahead and select next. And the one thing that I need to decide completely is that primary contact that Hrvoje said. So I'm just going to go ahead and put myself as Cork here. And last but not least, I need to read what I'm going to create. I need to select that I understand all the conditions that Hrvoje wrote for me, and then I go ahead and click on request team. So once this request is sent, I can see it right here under on this list. I can see that it's awaiting approval. I can see that I requested it, obviously, but I can also see who my approvers are. So if I need to ping them, I can see who they are actually. And on the details, I can also go ahead and cancel this request if necessary. All right, so let's imagine that Hrvoje now accepted my request. This team is created. I've been using it for a few months or so. And what he also set up for me is the access review. So after a few months, I need to check who actually has access to this team that I just created. So this is what the access review feature in Syskit Point looks like. Myself as an end user will receive this email saying that I need to review the team where I'm an owner. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on that button, and it will lead me straight to the Syskit Point Teams interface to imaginary team called Team Building 2021. And it leads to this quick wizard, 4-step wizard actually, with only 2, where you have to perform some actions. On the first one, you can see the overview of the team, some description, sharing policy, when it was last active, privacy, and so on. And you go ahead and click on Start Review. On the member step, it's important to validate that all the people that need to have the access are actually in this team. And you can do so by using these powerful filters. You can see all the owners that are in a certain team. You can see the members. And probably the most important, you can see the list of all the guest users. So the users that are outside your organization but have access to this team. You can also go ahead and select a certain user, change it to member or promote him to an owner. You can see its activity. If you're interested into more details, for example, for all your guest users, you can also select a report, user activity, which will lead you to seeing all the actions that user performed in your environment for, let's say, last 7 days in this case. Once you're completely happy with all the people you're seeing here, you're going on the next and final step here, where you're actually reviewing content. So you can either see content in this sense that you are actually looking at a certain file and you want to grant access or delete all unique permissions for it. You can see all the files that have been shared in your company, but outside of the group, ones shared externally, and the most dangerous one, the anonymous links that were shared with anyone. Or you can, for example, go to this users view and check all your external users. Let's say you are willing to see Evangelia's files. You can go ahead and click here and see that she has access to the files she may not have to, and you can go ahead and remove the sharing links straight away from here. So just to make sure that all the right people have the access to the right data. And on the final step, we made no changes at this point, but here is where you will see all the things you have performed. You will go ahead and complete the report, tell your administrator that everything is good here, confirm it, and that's pretty much the end of this access review. So yeah, quickly, I think we try to show you a bit. We have other governance features as well that are quite useful, something that Todd also tackled regarding the lifecycle management and archiving the workloads you no longer use. But that we'll leave that for another occasion. I will just go ahead and ask Ivan if we have any questions at this point.
Yeah, well, thanks Alexandra and Hrvoje for the awesome job as always. So no need to mention it. And folks, now it's time for our Q&A session with Todd, Alex, and Hrvoje. So please feel free to ask anything using the Q&A function on the top right. So folks, are you ready? I believe we have one for, Todd from Joe. He said, hello,
Hi, Joe.
Todd. So another one we have from Marcel. I can just read it out to you. I think this is meant for you, Todd. One of the things I spend the most time on is external sharing. It is really painful since often the guests need a lot of hand-holding. Is Microsoft going to fix this? E.g., users may be logged into a different tenant. Also, they may have a live ID and an org account without knowing or understanding the difference. So he had to run, but an email response would be great.
Sure. Send me his email address, and I will respond to Marcel. For everybody who's not Marcel, that's just eavesdropping and curious about this. Marcel's pain is very common. Sharing, it's one of those things, and man, it's easy to bash on Microsoft, but in all reality, if there was an easier way to do this, they would, because making things easy to share is just so pivotal to the platform being successful. And if there was any way to avoid that, they would do that. The live ID versus Microsoft thing kind of got fixed a few years ago. There used to be an issue where if you had a live ID that was not, at passport.com or hotmail.com for your own domain, you could create that as a live ID. But then if you ever brought that domain into Office 365, there could be two of them. Man, those were a rough couple of years when they collapsed that. But all of those IDs are now in one place inside of Microsoft, so that shouldn't matter. But yeah, trying to explain to somebody, like my mom or somebody who doesn't work in this, that is a tough thing to do. I don't know what changes they're making to that. I know that they're incrementally doing things like making the interface the same if you share it with an at Hotmail or at Google or .yahoo, and then in the background they try to figure out which kind of way to throw people in. But yeah, it's tough. The struggle is real. I can't argue with that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Todd. Your answer is much appreciated here. So also one for you, Todd, that we have other for Hrvoje, but I'm going to just lay it on to you right now. So from Thomas, we have a question: how do you get a dev tenant?
How do you get a dev tenant? All right, Thomas. I like that spirit, because that tells me that you're going to get in there and make a mess, and I like that. So I'm going to put in, I guess, in the chat for the organizers, because I can't chat with the regular folks here, a blog post on how to do that. Everybody that doesn't have a dev tenant should read that also. So here it is. If you go to toddklindt.com /get-dev-tenant, that will also take you there. That's a little different than the link that I've got here. But basically, it's Microsoft's got them set up. A great thing. You sign it up for free. You just have to admit in public that you're a developer, which granted was a little tough for me at first, but nobody that I know saw it, so it was okay. But then you get this great fully featured tenant, 25 licenses. It's got data, there jobs running in the background, all kinds of stuff. It is the best thing ever. So I normally, for those of you who've been on these before, I really like PowerShell. I almost always have one or two PowerShell tabs open that's already connected to my dev tenant, because I'll see something, I'll read an article somewhere, and I will need to immediately rush to PowerShell and try it. And it's a dev tenant, so it doesn't matter. I can break everything. It's okay. But Thomas, I look forward to hearing what kind of trouble you cause in your dev tenant. Let's see some carnage.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Todd. So the next one will actually go out to Hrvoje. We have a question from Louis. Is there an API interface so that other applications like Service Desk or Power Automate could interface with your application?
So yeah, currently for this provisioning part, we do not have it. It's in our roadmap. We are working on it, but we are introducing API for reporting later on this year. So this is something that we're also working in I would say, two-pronged attack. So we also have reporting, and you'll also be able to integrate your own provisioning process using some external tools with the point as well.
Yeah, thanks, Hrvoje. And the last question, since we are almost out of time, can we create a custom template and change the template later on and update all the template-based instances with those updates?
Is
that for me, or is that for the Syskit product?
It's for Hrvoje, I believe.
Okay.
You can update the template, and going forward, you're going to get new results, but there is no currently capability to do it on the old resources, I would say.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Hervé. And I think we are out of time. So once again, thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. As mentioned, everyone who registered will receive a recording of the webinar within a few days. Thanks again to you, Todd, for joining us today and for the great presentation as always. And if you have any further questions regarding Syskit Point or any other products we have, please reach out to us via sales@syskit.com. It was a pleasure having you all here, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye.